Do you constantly feel uneasy, overstimulated, or anxious even though nothing's actually wrong? What if I told you that you're not broken, you're not sick, and you don't need fixing, you're just awake? In this talk, we'll explore why your so-called anxiety might be the first real sign that you're finally seeing life as it is. When you say, "I'm anxious," what are you really saying? Is it that something's wrong, something's broken, or is it simply that something is happening? Because you see, there's a peculiar confusion we humans have. We've come to believe that the natural sensation of being aware, of being alive, attentive, and present must mean that something is off. That if our heart races, if we feel tight in our chest, if our thoughts swirl faster than usual, we must be malfunctioning. But that is not necessarily so. That twitch in your belly, the heat rising in your neck, the breath that skips a beat, these are not the signs of failure, they're signs of sensitivity. And sensitivity is not a flaw, it's awareness without a filter. Now, awareness is an odd thing because the moment you really begin to notice life, it doesn't come gently. It's not a quiet knock on the door. It's an invasion of color, texture, sound, unpredictability, and sheer aliveness, all crashing into your senses. And it overwhelms you, not because you're weak or broken, but because you're suddenly awake. Awake to the world as it is, not the sanitized, dull version you were trained to accept, but the pulsating, mysterious, chaotic wonder that it actually is. You walk down the street, and for the first time, you notice the rhythm of your footsteps, the tension in someone's eyes, the invisible buzzing of everyone's hurried minds, and you wonder, was this always happening? Yes, it was, but now you are awake enough to feel it, and so you call it anxiety, but that's just a name. What you're experiencing isn't a glitch, it's perception undiluted. Imagine this. You've been in a darkened room your whole life, a place where everything is dull, quiet, softened. You can navigate it, it's familiar, controlled, but then someone opens a window. Suddenly light floods in. You squint, the colors burn, the air is too sharp, and for a moment, you feel panic. Not because there's anything dangerous, but because your senses are working properly for the first time. This is what happens when we begin to really notice ourselves, the body, the thoughts, the twitch of emotion, all the strange fluttering things we usually brush aside. They flood in, and we are unprepared for the honesty of it. We call it anxiety. But, my dear listener, anxiety is often no more than a word for, "I'm feeling more than I know what to do with." You feel your existence, your choices, the passage of time, the responsibility of freedom, the impermanence of it all. These are not flaws in your psyche. These are truths knocking. And yet, we've built an entire culture around resisting that knock. From the moment we're old enough to speak, we're taught to tune out, to numb, to avoid stillness, to fear quiet. Because when the noise fades, we're left with something even louder, ourselves. And that's a lot to feel. Now consider this. Your anxiety might just be the natural alarm clock of your awareness ringing after years of being on mute. It is your nervous system, your consciousness, even your soul waking up and realizing, there's more here than I've allowed myself to see. And of course, that's intense. Of course it rushes in like a flood, because truth always arrives in abundance. But here's the strange part. We never doubt our devices when they get an update. We don't assume our phone is broken because it suddenly has a new feature. But when the mind begins to evolve, when awareness becomes more expansive, more inclusive, more alive, we panic. We assume something is wrong. Maybe it isn't. Maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're not anxious. Maybe you're just finally in contact with reality, raw and unfiltered. And reality, in its first appearance, is rarely calm. It's full, it's vast, it's untamed, but it's also the only place you'll ever truly meet yourself. Let me know when you're ready to move on to the next keynote. Modern society pathologizes consciousness. Spiritual awakening feels uncomfortable, or being present is not always peaceful. Why is it that when a person begins to feel deeply, to see intricately, to question thoroughly, society immediately becomes concerned? Why is it when you start to experience life not just as a checklist, but as an overwhelming and beautiful mystery, the first thing we do is diagnose you? Yes, you must be anxious, you must be depressed, your brain must be chemically imbalanced, something surely is wrong. But you see, what's truly wrong may not be within you at all. It may very well be the container in which you're being told to live. Because the modern world, for all its flashing lights and endless comforts, has a deep aversion to consciousness. Not the shallow kind of awareness, the one used to memorize passwords and navigate traffic, but the kind that shakes you to your bones, the kind that questions systems, that breaks routine, that doesn't nod along politely when something feels false. That kind of consciousness, it's inconvenient, you see. Our culture doesn't quite know what to do with people who feel too much, who see too far, or who ask why the entire machine runs the way it does. So instead of celebrating sensitivity, we sedate it, we label it, we turn awareness into a symptom. We call the child who's curious and wild disordered. We tell the adult who can't sleep because they're pondering existence that they need a pill. We convince the soul aching for something more that they are simply broken. But perhaps the soul isn't broken. Perhaps the culture is too shallow to hold that depth. We've created a society that praises productivity over presence, one that values fitting in over waking up. And when someone begins to peel back the curtain, when they start to really see, we panic. Because the system is built to reward those who comply, not those who awaken. Now, let's look at how this plays out. Imagine for a moment a person who begins to feel that their 9-to-5 routine, their obligations, their roles, all the little parts they play, feel hollow. Not because something catastrophic happened, but because something deep inside begins to whisper, "There's more to life than this." What do we do with that person? We tell them they're stressed. We hand them something to take the edge off. We advise distraction, binge watch, overwork, meditate, but only if it makes you more efficient. We very rarely say, perhaps you're waking up, because we are terrified of what consciousness threatens. Consciousness threatens the whole script. If you become truly awake, you may not want to consume as much. You may not want to chase what everyone else is chasing. You may not find meaning in the next promotion, the next gadget, the next trend. And if enough people wake up in that way, the system no longer holds. So the very act of becoming conscious, of asking, of noticing, of feeling, becomes medicalized. You become a problem to be solved, rather than a perspective to be explored. But what if, and just stay with this for a moment, what if the feelings you're having are not signs of illness, but signs of life, of aliveness? What if your restlessness is not something to cure, but something to listen to? The way a seed stirs before it breaks open, the way tectonic plates shift before the land rises? Perhaps your discomfort is just the first movement of your soul expanding beyond the limits you were trained to accept. Now, this is not to dismiss genuine suffering, or to say that all pain is sacred. Not all of it is. But far too often we throw the word disorder at anything that doesn't follow the norm, and yet it's the norm that might be disordered. To spend 40, 50, 60 years suppressing your own truth just to play a role that never fit? That is madness dressed in routine. To numb your curiosity just to get by? That is sanity diluted into obedience. You see, if you start feeling like you don't belong, that might not be your failure. That might be your intelligence. If the way we live is causing sensitive, intelligent people to feel constantly off, then maybe we need to stop asking what's wrong with the individual and start asking what's wrong with the culture that makes people feel this way for simply being alive. Because maybe it's not you that's too much, maybe it's the world that's too little. And when your consciousness outgrows the tight little box it was placed in, it doesn't mean you're malfunctioning, it means you're evolving, ready for the next chapter. I can expand on spiritual awakening, feeling uncomfortable, or move on to being present is not always peaceful. Let me know which direction you'd like to go. There's a great illusion, and it's a seductive one, that spiritual awakening is all incense and bliss, peaceful smiles and golden light, that once you wake up, everything is serene, your thoughts are clear, and your path is effortless. But that, my dear friend, is not awakening. That is marketing. The truth is far less glamorous and infinitely more real. Because you see, when you first begin to awaken, it does not feel like liberation. It feels like disorientation. It feels like losing your grip on everything you once believed was solid. It feels like being stripped bare in the middle of a storm with no map, no anchor, and no idea who you are anymore. And that raw, terrifying confusion is not a mistake. It is the beginning. When people say things like, "I'm going through a spiritual awakening," they often speak as if it's a gentle unfolding. But what it really feels like is chaos, panic even. Not because you're going mad, but because you're stepping out of a dream and the first moments of waking up are always jarring. Think of a time when you've been deep in sleep and someone suddenly switches on the light. It doesn't feel peaceful, does it? You recoil, you squint, you want to go back under the covers. That's what it's like when awareness enters the room of your mind. You're not broken, you're just beginning to see. And when you start to really see yourself, the world, the machinery behind your identity, it shakes the foundation. Because most of what we've built our lives on was inherited, conditioned, absorbed unconsciously. And when you realize that, it can feel like everything is crumbling. And in a way, it is. You're watching your old self fall apart. The self that was composed of roles and routines, expectations and defenses. The one that knew how to navigate the world, not because it was free, but because it had memorized the script. But the script is no longer working. It doesn't taste right anymore. It doesn't fit. And that feels like death, because it is the death of illusion. You start to feel things more intensely, not because something new is happening, but because your buffers are fading. The numbness is wearing off. You can no longer lie to yourself convincingly, and so emotions surface, old memories rise. The truth, once buried beneath years of social performance, begins to leak out in strange ways. In restlessness, in strange dreams, in tears you can't explain, in the sudden awareness that your life, while it may look fine from the outside, is echoing with the question, is this it? And that question is the crack in the wall. It's the invitation. But here's the curious thing. Most people run at this point because comfort is addictive, familiarity is warm, and the soul, when it begins to stir, threatens all of that. You start to notice how you've been living on autopilot, how much of your identity has been a performance, how many decisions you've made based on fear rather than freedom. And the worst part is, you can't go back. Not really. Once the curtain lifts, the illusion loses its power. That's what makes awakening so profoundly uncomfortable. You're caught between worlds, no longer asleep, but not yet sure how to walk through life awake. You are in the in-between, and the in-between is sacred. But oh, it is messy. Because now, you have to feel what you used to avoid. You have to meet the parts of yourself you've ignored. The shadow, the shame, the hunger, the truth. And that can feel like your skin being peeled back layer by layer until what remains is raw and real. But again, this is not dysfunction. This is not disorder. This is the unlearning, the shedding. You are not breaking down, you are breaking open. And while the outside may not see it, may not understand the subtle revolution happening within you, somewhere deep inside, even through the discomfort, there is a strange sense of alignment, a subtle knowing that the pain is not pointless, that something old is dying because something more honest wants to live. And it is this honesty, not comfort, that marks the true beginning of awakening. There is this rather romantic idea floating about that to be present is to be calm. That mindfulness, awareness, living in the now, must always feel serene, like sitting cross-legged on a hilltop, breathing in the breeze, detached from the madness of the world. But that idea, lovely as it sounds, is not quite true. Because being truly present, radically, honestly, fully here, does not always feel peaceful. In fact, more often than not, it feels incredibly raw. You see, we've spent so much of our lives avoiding the present moment. Not because we're lazy, but because the present holds everything. The moment you truly become present, you are no longer just skimming the surface of life. You are dropped into its depths, and those depths are not made only of sunsets and stillness. They are also made of tension, contradiction, longing, awkward silence, unresolved emotions, and the bittersweet taste of being human. You begin to feel not just what's happening outside you, but what's been waiting inside you, patiently, all these years. Because to be present isn't simply to notice the flower. It's to notice the ache behind your eyes while you look at it. It's to hear your heartbeat when the world gets quiet. It's to sit in the middle of your own chaos, not trying to fix it, not trying to flee from it, but just being there. And that is not always peaceful. Peace is what we sell in meditation apps. Presence is what actually shows up when you stop pretending. When you slow down enough to hear what your body has been saying beneath the noise of schedules. When you pause long enough to realize how lonely you've been, even in a crowd. When you feel your breath, not as a technique, but as the only thing keeping you tethered to this moment. And that too, one day will stop. This kind of presence is not poetic, it's personal. It invites you to witness your life exactly as it is, not as you wish it were, not as others think it should be, but as it actually is in this moment with nothing edited. And that's not easy. It's not always enjoyable because presence reveals. It reveals where you're out of alignment. It reveals where you're still clinging. It reveals the quiet grief you've been carrying, the forgiveness you never gave, the truth you swallowed years ago because it was too inconvenient to speak aloud. Presence does not hand you a cushion, it hands you a mirror. And so, we avoid it. We keep ourselves busy, distracted, scrolling, clicking, hurrying, performing. We say, I don't have time to be still. But what we really mean is, I don't want to see what stillness will show me. Because we instinctively know, even without words, that being present strips away our distractions. And without distractions, we are left with the truth, all of it. And yet, this is where life begins. Not in the tidy corners of comfort, but in the wild middle of reality. When you dare to be here, truly here, you begin to feel more alive. Not because it always feels good, but because it always feels real. You cry more easily, you laugh without reason, you notice the way light spills through a window. You feel tenderness toward people who used to annoy you. You start to understand that everything, even the painful parts, has its own strange beauty. But presence won't let you control the experience. That's the trick. It asks only one thing: be with what is. Don't fix it, don't name it. Just sit, just feel, just breathe through it. And you will find that the moment may not be peaceful, but it is complete. Because real presence is not an escape from life. It's an entrance. And you cannot enter life halfway. You must step through the whole door, chaos and clarity, joy and discomfort, all of it, or you remain a visitor in your own existence. So, when you say you want to be present, understand what you're truly asking. You're not asking for calm, you're asking for contact. Contact with the world, with yourself, with everything that comes alive. When you stop numbing, stop narrating, stop reaching for the next thing, and just allow this moment to be what it is.